We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets.
I have the body of a weak and feeble woman.
All men are created equal. Because I have a dream.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Hello everybody and welcome to the latest episode of ModsPod. It's a very, very special episode, this one. A personal journey. We have Ethan. Hello Ethan, you alright?
Hello, my name's Ethan Ward and I'm going to be looking at World War II from three different perspectives. A frontline soldier, a land army girl and an evacuee. These are all personal accounts from three of my great-grandparents and I'm here today to share them with you.
Oh, it's going to be brilliant. So you've been doing a bit of research on this then?
Yep.
Oh, looking forward to it. So we're going to have some pictures and things to go with this as well, aren't we?
Yeah.
This is going to be epic and it's the power of the family.
Yeah.
All right, shall we start then with a bit of context from World War II?
Yeah. World War II was the biggest and deadliest war in history and it involved more than 30 countries. It started on the 1st of September 1939 as a result of Hitler's invasion of Poland and lasted until the 6th of May 1945, with the VE Day officially being celebrated on May 8th, 1945. 20 million military personnel and about 40 million civilians were killed, with over 1 million people being evacuated from the big cities in the UK.
Wow, nice. Did you tell me something today about VE Day being... They delayed it by 2 days or something?
Yes, so my granddad said that they wanted, all the presidents wanted, of the states wanted to put it on the same day, like all organise it at the same time. So they delayed it by 2 days so they could put the message out at the same time.
That's cool. I remember when you told me that, I was like, I did not know that. Maybe I should do as a history teacher, but that's the point. We're always learning, aren't we? All right, so that's good context then. So we know this war is horrific. 20 million military personnel injured and 40 million dead. Wow. So your family, we're going to start with Grandad Philip.
Great-Grandad Philip. So Philip Walter Ward, he was born on the 12th of February 1925 in Beecham Well in Norfolk. He left the school in summer 1939, just 14, where he became an apprentice carpenter, joiner and wheelwright. He was like, his father expected him to become a shepherd, but his mother wanted more for him.
Okay.
And then he was 14, just 14 when it started, but he joined up at 18. And after he took the aptitude tests, he was initially signed to the Cheshire Regiment because it showed he was good at mechanical things, where he trained on the Vickers .303 machine gun.
Oh, nice.
He also became a dispatch rider there, where he had to escort military convoys with other dispatch riders. But this was not an easy task because all the signposts have been removed.
I wanted to remove the signposts.
About a year later, he then volunteered to become a paratrooper with his good friend Eric Sellers. And his initial request wasn't actually submitted because the Cheshire Regiment didn't want to lose some good men.
I bet they didn't.
And then in paratraining, the first jump they completed from a barrage balloon at a very low height of only 500 feet, where they jumped from such a low altitude to minimise the time they were in the air and then reduce the chance of being shot. In action, they jumped from a static line in either a Dakota or Wellington at about 600 feet, so only a bit higher. And then the joke when they were issued with the parachute was, if it didn't work, they could take it back and get another one.
Yeah, you'd hope it would work though. Do you think it never? How often do you think they didn't work?
Well, Grandad does remember, like sometimes it didn't work and they
Really?
just died. Yeah.
Oh God.
He actually completed a total of 19 jumps and would say, jumping out of planes was easy. It's the silly places they dropped you, which was difficult.
Yeah, I bet it was right into enemy lines probably.
Yeah.
That's really cool. That is just interesting how they practice that. It's good that they had some jokes, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
I suppose you have to make
Lighten the
light of
mood
it.
of it, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
When he joined in the 9th Battalion and the Parachute Regiment in Bolford, it was like really quiet. And the remaining men were told everyone was on a training exercise. But actually, they were locked in a secure transit camp, ready for the invasion of Normandy on the 6th of June 1944. The 9th Parachute Battalion consists of approximately 700 men, and before his death earlier this year, Granham was believed to be the last one left that fought in the Battle of Merville.
Wow.
The Vickers machine gun weighed about 12.5 kilograms, but the tripod weighed another 21 kilograms, and also needed 4.3 litres of water to cool it down and prevent it from overheating. And there was a crew of 6 men to each gun. One carried the gun, set it up, found the range and aimed it, Second carried the tripod and fed the bullets of ammo in. The gun fired 500 bullets a minute, so the 4 other men had to carry the ammo.
Wow, 500. What's that, about 4, 5, 7 a second?
Yeah, it's crazy fast.
Yeah, wow.
In late March or early April, Grandad was dropped near a place called Wessel, just across the Rhine in Germany. And at that point, the orders were to advance in Germany and anything bigger than them, just to go around, not engage in direct combat. They moved on foot by night, taking 4 to 5 weeks and marching 400 miles.
Do you think they never thought of that? When they started to jump out of planes, they'd have a 400-mile march.
And also, Grandad remembers, like, because he was from Norfolk, he was good with horses. Every time they'd pass like a horse, they'd be like, they'd call him, said, Norfolk, grab that horse.
That's what they called them,
Yeah.
Norfolk. Nice. So they take the horses, did they, or just like pat them and stuff and then
They
move
would,
on?
take them to extra transport or anything
of course,
like that.
good idea.
They then ended up at Wismar on the Baltic, on the north coast of Germany, and they slept anywhere they could, in bushes, outbuildings, and they were only dropped with 48-hour ration packs, including tea, 6 boiled sweets, and only 3 sheets of toilet paper for 48 hours.
Ouch. They'd get some leaves there.
Yeah.
Well, that's disgusting, isn't it? At least you got the tea, though.
Yeah. And the boiled sweets were to, like, keep them.
Yeah, keep the spirits up.
Yeah, they had something when they were walking them 400 miles. They were then, like, followed by a supply train with rations, ammunition, even a bath and laundry. And then they were given extra rations, and Grandad remembers being well fed.
Really? I didn't. Let's just see the interest in these, because you've done this research and you've got the real stories. I don't think the movies tell you, do they, about the sweets and the toilet paper and stuff. And this is what makes this whole episode even more exciting for me, is finding out these little bits that you found out from Grandad and about Grandad. It's just amazing.
The war was technically over on the 6th of May 1945, as we said earlier, but President Roosevelt, Joseph Stalin and Winston Churchill agreed to announce it simultaneously on the 8th of May. On the 6th of May, Grandad and the rest of the 6th Airborne Division, made up of approximately 10,000 men, attended a service of celebration at St. Nicholas's Church in Wismar, 2 days earlier than the rest of the world. My Grandad still actually has the sheet from then.
Really?
Yeah.
The service sheet?
Yeah, the service sheet.
So they all had this little celebration before the world even knew.
And there was barely any service sheets anyway. They had to, like, share them out, like, as in groups.
Wow.
And at the end of the war, Grandad remembers, like, borrowing a boat with a loot where they were swimming, sailing and larking about in the harbour with his friends. And then within a week, they were flown back home in a fleet of Dakotas.
So they had a week to sort of
just
celebrate, relax.
Yeah.
And then
before they were flown back home.
Nice.
After World War I finished and all the soldiers returned, there was a massive influx of people and not enough jobs, which then led to the Great Depression. After World War II, they didn't want to make the same mistake again, so soldiers continued to serve after the war, and they were gradually demobbed over time. And when my Grandad got back, the 9th Battalion were kitted out to be part of the peacekeeping force in Palestine, where my Grandad was promoted to corporal on 22nd of October, 1945.
So if you're watching this podcast on YouTube, you'll be able to see some photographs now in Palestine. And if you're listening on Spotify, there's some incredible pictures capturing Grandad in Palestine.
So part of the problem of the war now is when they went over to Palestine, they just said, this is yours, and didn't necessarily account for, like, if people had ancestors that were farming that land, or if that land was, like, went back in history. So now they're, like, arguing over, well, we want this back, and so on and so forth.
So this Palestinian conflict with Israel now, probably is that linked as well? Yeah,
that's definitely linked to back into World War II time. During my Grandad's time in Palestine, he was promoted to sergeant and was in charge of all 4 Vickers machine guns in the machine gun section. But in March 1947, he came back to England on leave for a month, where he got engaged to my Nana Casey, who I'll speak about, who's in the Women's Land Army. And then he returned to Palestine until September 1947, where he was demobbed. And he was quite...
What does demobbed mean?
Where they were, like, allowed to go back, like, live a normal life rather than being...
So back to civilian life.
Yeah.
Okay, so is that something that they wanted to do, or is that something that sort of put on them after they'd finished their job?
I think, like, they just wanted to get back and enjoy a normal life.
Yeah, having lived through that last few years, I can understand why.
Yeah. And what my Grandad was, he was quite enthusiastic about engaging my Nana Casey, because while he was away, he was very worried about people, like,
What, robbing her?
stealing her. Yeah.
So I wonder if she actually knew that he was a bit not so sure. So the photograph that we can see on the video now, if you're watching on YouTube, is for my darling Casey,
Yeah.
from Philip.
Yeah.
So he's obviously trying to keep on good terms with her, wasn't he?
Yeah. And I think my granddad remembered, like, definitely thinking that woman was out of my league.
Oh, poor Philip. I'm sure Nana Casey wasn't thinking that, though.
Yeah. I think they loved each other very much.
Yeah, well, he's a bit of a hero, isn't he?
When Grandad returned to work as an apprentice carpenter, his boss said he didn't need to complete the remaining 2 years of his apprenticeship and be paid like a real man's wage. And this just showed in the time how valued the soldiers were by people of society.
Yeah.
And that was a gesture that Grandad really appreciated. And in November 1947, he married my Nana Casey, and they lived with my Nan's parents due to the shortage of houses back then. I'll now show you some brief accounts of situations my granddad found himself in that had a particular impact on him. While on one particular mission, my granddad and his comrades were taking turns being on a 2-hour watch of their camp. My granddad took his turn on watch, then handed over to his mate Spen. When camp woke up, they realised the guy due to take over from Spen hadn't been woken up for his watch. When they went to investigate, they realised he was lying there dead on the floor, with no bullet wounds or anything. There was no obvious sign of the death. They concluded that he'd died from either cold or fatigue. And this had a big impact on my granddad. He later returned to where Spen was buried in Ronville Cemetery, Normandy, to pay his respects to him.
Oh, wow, that must be awful, mustn't it?
Yeah.
So they just wondered, where is he? He's probably joking, going, oh, we slept in, and then they found him.
My granddad remembered that right up until he died, which showed how much of an impact stuff like that had on them.
It gives you a bit of an idea, doesn't it, about how close these guys got with each other in that hell, I suppose, when your life depends on each other.
Yeah, they're the only people you've got.
Yeah, definitely. That's a bit of a sad story, Ethan.
Yeah. He also remembers marching through a local village, and the Germans had passed through there not long before them. They just rounded up all the young men that they thought were in the resistance, shot them and kicked them down the cellar steps.
So he was very lucky then.
Yeah.
Just to miss them.
And then his granddad and his comrades retrieved the bodies from the cellar. They then carried 3 of them actually to a neighbouring village where they came from, dug graves for the men in deep snow, and took part in the burials to pay their respects to them. Grandad remembers somehow being supplied with 35 coffins for the men and greatcoats for him and his comrades, so they looked smart in honour of the men that had perished.
Wow, so somewhere out there are these burials. Did they get real proper burials in the end, or is that where they laid?
I think they just had a service, and that's just where they laid in the coffins.
So someone just found, or they managed to get 35 coffins to do the service. Wow, what a thing to have to do. And
this was all while they were during the war, so they actually got what burial they deserved, really.
And to say goodbye as well. Wonder where they got the 35 coffins from. That's an interesting story.
Where everyone was rationing stuff.
Yeah, we might be able to do a bit of research on that and see if we can find that out in time.
My granddad also remembers his platoon being camped overnight in some mushroom huts during the Battle of the Bulge in the Ardennes in Holland. Grandad and his good friend Eric Sellers snuck out and went to the nearest village where they got acquainted with the locals. One being a train driver who invited them back to his house where they stayed overnight in relative comfort compared to what they were used to. When they got back to the camp the next morning, the rest of the men appeared drunk, slipping over and falling to the ground. It turned out they had carbon monoxide poisoning from the coke braziers that were burning overnight. No one could understand why my granddad and Eric were fine while everyone else was sick. My granddad told them it was because they'd slept by the door, but really they'd been cementing foreign relations.
I wonder what does that mean?
Well,
having a drink with some foreign.
Yeah. And actually, funny enough, after the war, Eric actually went back to the same village and married the train driver's daughter, who was called Glenn.
So, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see this photograph now is of actually them in the village with Glenn.
Yeah.
So there's also information on the back of the photograph as well, isn't there, to authenticate? And that was sent to Grandad? Yeah,
it was Eric sent it to Grandad saying he was all right and married her.
Wow, it's a lovely story.
Yeah, I love listening to my granddad's stories about his time, and I feel really lucky to have such a personal insight as to what it was like.
Yeah, I think I teach this, obviously, and I teach it to a certain element. We can only do so much in an hour or two, a fortnight, but to actually listen to Grandad and hear these real stories, it's by far the best way to learn about it.
When it's such personal, I think it has a really big impact.
Yeah, I can see it listening to you, and as well all the hours that you spent on this, which makes this episode all that more special because it's real, isn't it? It's not just, oh, on this day this happened. You are getting some real stories that are within Grandad's memories and mind that no one else really, until you tell them us now, get to share these stories. And I think it's important to share these stories, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
So thank you so much for this.
If we don't share them, then they'll be forgotten.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now I'm moving on to my Nana Casey, who was in the Women's Land Army. And the Women's Land Army played a vital but often overlooked role in the war. The formation of the Women's Land Army goes back to the First World War. In May 1917, with only 3 weeks' food supply left in the country, and the German naval blockade at its height, desperate measures to ease the situation were called for. Women answered the call from all walks of life at a time when they were not encouraged or expected to contribute to life outside the home. These were women who had scarcely ventured outside their own towns or villages, and very few had any concept or experience of working on the land. At first, there were just a few women, but by the end of the First World War, numbers had reached 23,000.
Wow.
And at the end of the Second World War, gone up to even 80,000. At the outbreak of the Second World War, the Women's Land Army were better organised to meet the challenge which lay ahead. On the outbreak of the hostilities, they were immediately able to mobilise 1,000 volunteers and to supply more and more recruits as the war went on. Unfortunately, it was not all roses. There was lots of resentment of many in the farms because the women were replacing the men. Some of the men didn't even want to go to war, and then the farmers were upset because their male labour was being replaced by women. They felt the women weren't capable of undertaking the physically demanding work, and then they often made their lives very difficult. The Women's Land Army also had to fight long and hard for even basic rights for the girls, many of them only teenagers. A minimum wage was only agreed in 1940, and the concept of 1 day off per week remained a novelty rather than a right for a very long time.
Wow, that's a really interesting perspective of that, isn't it? Or to know that the women face that kind of treatment and resentment.
And in such an important time as well. They weren't even paid the same as men.
Wow, so that's similar, isn't it, I guess? So in World War One, the women were just going through that suffragette movement, weren't they? And here we are now, having proved during World War One how important, how brilliant the women were at home. They then are still facing, I guess, a weird prejudice in a way for being women at home.
Yeah.
That's a bit of a shame.
We knew what an important role they were playing, but we didn't pay them the same amount.
So that they deserve even more respect then, don't they, for that? For
coming in from even my great nan's friend Edna moved from Liverpool to just work in the Land Army, and it's crazy what they left behind to start a new life.
To make their contribution. To be fair, I'd have left Liverpool as well.
Furthermore, in 1945, the Land Army was still excluded from the resettlement grants given to the Civil Defence and other auxiliary organisations at the end of the war. Sadly, I don't know as much about my Nana Casey's experience, as she died before I was born, but I'll tell you what I will know. Mabel Irene Casey, better known as Casey, joined the Women's Land Army in 1943 at the age of 17. She first worked on Grange Farm here in Terrington St Clements.
Really? Wow. Is that the first link to Terrington? Or
I think so, yeah. But on my dad's side of the family, which Nana Silvers, which I'll speak about later as well, my granddad, he worked here somewhere in Terrington as well, so there is quite a few links here in the family. She then moved to Weasenham Farm in Norfolk, where the farmer made it clear he didn't want Land Army girls on farm. He forced them to do long, physically hard days and making sure they did a man's work, pushing them to their limits, physically and mentally. At 17, my nan drove 4 horses to a 4-hour drive to the mill at West Newton. When I think about this in relation to my own age and physical abilities, I really can't imagine how tough it was. To do that.
It's a different breed of people, isn't it?
Yeah.
They stepped up. There was just a different attitude, I think, wasn't there, back then?
It shows their determination.
Yeah, definitely. To imagine today, people struggling to get them to do a bit of homework, aren't we?
The last farm she was on was in Barton Bendish, and here my nan worked with a gang of around 20 other girls. They all lived in a hostel together and formed lifelong friends. My nan's best friend was a lady called Edna, who came from Liverpool. She was only 15 years old, and her desire to join the Land Army was so strong, she actually forged her parents' signature on the sign-up papers and left her family behind.
Wow. That's a good story, isn't it? Wow.
My nan and Ed remained the closest of friends until the day my nan died. Despite the fact it was incredibly hard, both emotionally and physically, many Land Army girls had a wonderful time because of the comradeship and the fact that everyone was fighting towards the same end.
So they were doing their bit. They felt they were contributing to the effort.
And I think my nan said she definitely had like a great time and it was a really good time of her life. So even with the farmers being like resenting them because they maybe couldn't do what the men could do, they really enjoyed it.
I bet you some of these women could do it well better than the men.
Yeah. I know that my nan remembered her time in the Land Army with great fondness. As well as working on the land, the women organised dances and children's parties for the local community where they were living. After the war had finished, the Land Army remained, and the women continued to serve. As I discussed earlier, many of the men had been deployed to other locations, so the need for the Land Army girls was still there even after the war. Nan served in the Land Army for 4 years, and during her time was promoted to sergeant. All Land Army girls received a half-diamond badge for every 6 months' service, which they sewed onto their uniform, which you can see if you're watching on YouTube. Nan finished her time in the Land Army on the 24th of October 1947, which she had to seek permission to leave as she wanted to marry my Grandad Philip, and only single women were allowed in the Land Army.
Well, that's good for Grandad Philip, as we know from earlier. He was very worried about losing it, wasn't he?
Yeah, very worried, I think, yeah. So now I'm going to speak about my Nana Sylve, who was an evacuee in World War II. She was just 2 years old when she was evacuated from London. Right, and so now I'm going to give a bit of context on the evacuees from World War II. In just 3 days, 1.5 million children were evacuated from major towns and cities, and it is believed that over the course of the war, 4 million children had been evacuated. Another one of my great nanas, Sylvia Garlike, was born in Paddington, London, and was 2 years old when the war broke out. She had 2 of her uncles that already lived in Norfolk at the time and were concerned about their sister's safety with all the bombings that were going on. So on September 29th, they sent a lorry to evacuate them to Wigan Hall St Mary in Magdalen, where they still live now. It was 3 a.m. in the morning, and my nan remembers being bundled into a lorry with her mum, sisters, 3 aunts, 2 uncles, her cousins, and their belongings. They were all huddled together to shield themselves from the cold. My nan's dad sadly couldn't go with them as he was building an air raid shelter for 10 Downing Street.
Wow. So even then, the influences of this wonderful family of yours, 10 Downing Street.
Hours later, they arrived at Stowe Bridge to drop off 2 of Nan's aunts and uncles where they were going to live. Nan and her mum, sister, 1 aunt and 1 uncle were to live with one of the uncles who had sent for them at Sunnyside Farm. Nan's dad joined later after the work in London was complete. After some time, Nana's mum and dad and aunt moved from Sunnyside Farm to a house down Prophet's Alley in Magdalen. Nana's family lived in one side and her aunt and cousins lived in the other. She remembered it being very cramped, but okay, and hearing the air raid sirens, but being very scared. Nan and her cousins went to Magdalen Infant School, and at regular intervals, a big van would actually come down to the school. They would all have to get strapped inside to make sure their gas masks worked. My nan feels very lucky to have been evacuated to relatives, as thousands of children from London were sent away with just a name tag and a suitcase, and didn't know if they'd ever see their parents again. On VE Day, my nan remembers everyone being so happy, parents and young alike. There were bonfires, parties, singing, dancing, and music of some kind everywhere in the country.
Oh, I bet there was. So that's an interesting thing, isn't it? That some kids went to some random people in the countryside, I guess, but because there was contacts in Norfolk, they were able to come here.
And Nan feels really, really lucky about that.
Yeah, because imagine just how different life could have been had you went somewhere else.
Yeah.
Just somewhere else. That's a really interesting insight, isn't it, into that whole process. So, Ethan, that was a real journey that I've just gone on there with you. Thank you. It was a privilege to listen to. So you spent a little bit of time researching this. What was the most interesting or exciting thing that you found out while you were doing this?
I think probably the most interesting bit for me was when Eric Sellers, my granddad's good friend, actually went back after the war and married the train driver's daughter, Glenn. I think that's really interesting because had granddad and that not gone out that one night, Eric would have never had met the train driver's daughter.
Wow, so I can see why that's quite fascinating. So, how did you do your research? How did you find stuff out?
So, well, I had bits that I knew already of my granddad from listening to his stories and my nana Sylv. But then also there's lots online about them as well. And I asked my granddad, who, after, because he'd recently died, there was lots of facts and like diaries and that in his house that we'd found and looked through.
So you've done some proper historical research here.
And there's lots of like photos, and that my Nana Casey has a letter from the Queen, actually signed by her from her service in the Women's Land Army.
Well, we can have a look at that as well, can't we? If you're watching on YouTube now. So a bit of a family affair getting this together now.
Yeah, I think my granddad was involved. My mum was very involved as well by looking at it. And then my dad went over to see my Nana Sylv, who still lives in Magdalen to this day, just across the road.
So has that sort of triggered lots of other conversations and stuff and memories from them too?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Were they quite excited about you doing this little project?
Yeah, definitely. My granddad was like he was up helping us this morning before he went out.
So have you found anything else, like while you've been doing through the house and stuff?
Yeah, so actually my granddad, when he came back from the war, he had a German pistol that he buried in concrete underneath his cupboards as like a memento from his time in the war. But when he was like 97, I think, he decided it wouldn't be that good, because if he passed, that would be quite a big thing for our family to deal with, just finding a gun in his house.
Oh, so he's even thinking about everyone else.
So he took it out of the concrete and took it to a police station in a Tesco's carrier bag.
Well, that's how it should end its life, shouldn't it?
Yeah. And my granddad says how surprised they were when they saw a 97-year-old with a German pistol in a Tesco's carrier bag.
Wow. Were they grateful that he took it in?
Yeah, I think so.
That is something they never expected to see come to work that day, was it?
How you cool. Never expect that.
No, definitely not. So that's obviously had to be handed in because it might be seen as dangerous.
Yeah.
Oh, it's cool that it's hidden all that time underneath the concrete, eh?
Yeah. Also, there was a shovel that he gave to my little brother, William, while he was alive, that like folds up, and it's got like a saw on one bit that I think was definitely seen in action at one point. And William absolutely loves it. He always
does he? I bet he does.
It with him, yeah.
It's because it's part of great granddad.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of that story, isn't it? Maybe when William's a bit older, he can listen to this as well.
We've never seen, like, we don't know what shovel that shovel's seen, so whose it could have been before his and that.
And I think that's partly when we do these kinds of things why they mean so much, because your own imagination sort of takes off a little bit, doesn't it? And you start thinking, I wonder if, and chances are whatever you're wondering is definitely what it was probably used for in times as well. Just another part of his story though, isn't it? Which makes it even more special.
And while we're at it, another story that I remember him telling me was, whilst we were sitting there, because he came over to watch the King's coronation with us, he told us a story about when he was in the forces, the King was there, and my granddad had a drink. I think they were at a celebration, and the King said, "Oh, is that my drink?" And then, because you can't say no to him, so my granddad said, "Yes." And then, so the King actually had some of my granddad's drink.
You see, in high places, high people in high places. How rude though of the King just to assume that that's his drink. Do you think your granddad should have said, "Actually, no, Your Majesty, it's mine"?
Yeah.
I don't know, might have ended up in the tower, mightn't he?
I wondered how that would have gone down.
Actually, no, but I'll go and get you one, Your Majesty. How funny. Yeah. That's a cool little story. So, Ethan, do you feel like some responsibility to keep the sort of memories alive of great granddad and granddad and keep telling these things?
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm definitely going to tell them to my children, hope they tell them to their children and grandchildren and so on, like to keep the memories alive and keep passing that information on. Yeah,
so you did a little bit of primary school.
Yeah, so when I was in primary school, I remember like sitting on the phone to my granddad for 45 minutes plus, just listening to all of his stories that had a big impact on him, and many that I'd said about here when they were being camped overnight in the mushroom huts during the Battle of the Bulge, when they snuck out, and when Spen sadly died. And I think that one had probably the biggest impact on my granddad, because the fact that he did return to Ronville Cemetery to pay his respects.
Yeah, and like we said earlier when we were talking, they've been more like brothers, weren't they, than just comrades and friends.
I think they really got to know each other.
So when you sat there listening on the phone to these stories, do you remember feeling like, wow, just this is powerful?
Yeah.
It's better than any book or textbook anywhere, isn't it?
Definitely.
For sure.
I feel very lucky for the time I've had with him and have him share them stories with me. And last year I went to the para dinner with him in London, where they got him to read out some stuff before when they actually received a letter from Queen Elizabeth there, which I think I've showed you before.
Yeah.
And he's always been really almost worshipped by people, and because he was the last one left that fought in the Battle of Merville. So, and when they go on their Normandy trip, the 9th Battalion every year to the Merville Battery and other places around Normandy, they would always get him to read out some stuff. And if you watch it on YouTube, you'll be able to see some photos of that when he was speaking and different places like that.
So very revered and respected man.
Yeah, and I think he enjoyed paying respect to the soldiers that had gone before him.
So like a sort of duty.
Yeah.
Yeah, keeping their memories alive
definitely
almost.
Felt like it was his duty to
yeah, I've spoke to a few servicemen in their old age, and they all talk about that sort of need to keep their friends and their comrades alive, and their stories and their memories, just like you're doing for him.
Yeah, I think that's a very important thing to do.
I think it's the most important thing to do, isn't it? Absolutely. So we're going to the battlefields in May, aren't we? To France and Belgium. So I wonder if we can maybe if we can get a little detour to go to Ronville Cemetery.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to do that as it had such a big impact on my granddad. He returned to pay respects to Spen. I think it would mean a lot to me and my family if I could do that as well.
Yeah. So it's in the north, the very north of France. I've just checked on Google Maps, so I don't know that, but we've just checked on Google Maps. I'll ask our tour company, and they generally try it very hard to get us to do this.
Yeah.
That will be just amazing, won't it?
Yeah. I'd really love that if we could do that, hopefully.
I'll send a little message as well. So he's had this sort of little celebrity lifestyle thing there towards the end.
Yeah, when he also had a photographer come and take some photos of him. My favourite thing, and one this big photo that hung up in his kitchen, was in the background you can just see the lawnmower. And I can remember when he told us that the switch, I think the kill switch or something, broke on it. He wouldn't just go and get a new one. He did his own repair on the switch, which I always thought was amazing.
Make do amend, that was the attitude back then. You sure he wasn't a northerner? So who was it? It was from the north, from Liverpool. That was Nanny
Edna.
Casey's mate.
Edna, yeah.
Yeah, Edna. That'll be what I'd be trying to do as well, trying to fix it so they're buying a new one. So while I was just having a little break here on this Mods Pod, we've just done a little bit of research, haven't we?
Yep.
And we put in Spen. We found Spen. We found this grave in Ronville Cemetery. Just thinking about, because we're going to try and get there, aren't we? So we had a little look, and we found out when he died and what his plot is, his number, and that he was 18. So that's right. That's because Grandad was 18 as well.
How young they were.
Yeah.
And if they're around the same age, they must have.
So hopefully, fingers crossed, we can get our tour guide to take us and just see the grave, just for Grandad's sake, really.
Yeah.
And for yours as well. And then you just got on the phone to Grandad. Yeah.
And we've found out a bit of information about during the war and towards the end of the war from Grandad's perspective. And Grandad remembers there being so the Germans had these capes that they wore, and so when the rain was coming down to protect them, and it was one misty morning when they were launching an attack, and when they were coming over, you could actually hear the whoosh of the coats in the mist.
Really?
Hear them coming. That must have been very ominous.
Absolutely. That's a good vision. That's a really clear vision as well, isn't it? Or visualization in my mind.
Yeah, almost like Darth Vader.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. I was going to say, it's very much like Darth Vader, isn't it?
And when the Germans had surrendered at the end of the war, my granddad remembers all the German tanks coming with their gun barrels pointed down, big white cloths everywhere, certain they'd surrendered. And they were rushing, because they would rather meet up the Britons than the Russians, because they feared the Russians would absolutely slaughter them when they saw them. Yeah,
that is true. I did know that as well, that they would rather be captured by the British.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. So we just got that from a very quick phone call to Grandad then. I think we could probably have another 12 episodes of this, couldn't we?
Yeah.
Keep finding things out. And then when you find them bits and bobs at home. So furthermore, while we're doing a bit of research here, we found this letter from Spen's dad, who's written, and he says he wrote this on the 18th of the 9th, 44. He said, "To the commanding officer of the 9th Para Battalion, dear sir, it's with deep regret to learn of our son, Cyril Frederick Spen, who was killed in action." So his dad's, Spen's dad, thinks he was killed in action, but actually he just didn't turn up for his lookout duty.
Yeah, and I wonder if he still even thinks that to this day.
Yeah. Wow. That's very powerful, isn't it?
You can imagine thinking your son was killed in action, but really,
Yes. He must have had some sort of maybe an injury or an infection or something. We need this. We
Yeah.
need to try and find stuff out, don't we? He says we should esteem a great favour if it's possible to write a little more detail as how and where, also if possible the place where he is buried. So we know that, don't we, from Ramville Cemetery? That's quite sad, isn't it? They didn't even know where his son was buried when he wrote this.
That's really sad to.
Wowza.
And then to even think that your son died a completely different way to how they actually did.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's going to be long dead now, probably, isn't he? The dad. He says, also, I'd like to know if Ronald May in the same battalion came through the action. In my boy's last letter, he wrote so naturally about him, and I'm just anxious to make contact with him if it's at all possible. Thanking you in anticipation. So it's really heartfelt letter there, haven't we, from Spen's dad, trying to find this guy. Do you reckon that they ever wrote about Philip? Philip?
Well, maybe they could have. I think that's something we can always think about.
So on this letter here, if he's written about this Ronald May, they must have all been together, mustn't they, on this night?
And I'll ask my great granddad's son, my other granddad,
Ronald
if he
May.
can give me any more information on it.
So we'll have to try and find this Ronald May. We'll look in a minute. So basically, then, because Granddad Philip handed over the watch to Spen.
And then when the other guy wasn't woken up, they went to investigate, and
that's just insane, isn't it?
Yeah.
So then a little look at as well, some researching that Granddad Philip, all of his medals and everything.
Yeah, he received lots of medals, which were the 1939 to 1945 Star, the France and Germany Star, the Defence Medal, the War Medal, the General Service Medal, Service Medal of the Order of St. John, and the Legion d'Honneur.
Wow. What a great, honestly, list of accolades and achievements there.
I think he was very loved by the French, as he kept going over there, even after his service, right up until he died, really. And he was also very good friends with a mayor of one of the areas of France, kept writing to her, and he did, I think, a lot for some primary schools in France as well, wrote some letters to them, and even got some back from some of the students, which I thought was very nice.
Well, that is amazing, isn't it? So he's just touched people, continuously touched people forever and ever and ever. Wow. So when we're having a little bit of a research here now, and we found that letter about Spen, from Spen's dad asking about what happened, and we've looked at this Ronald May character. So we found, by doing a bit of research, a man called Ronald Tucker, who had a bit of a cool story. So he was in the same battalion as Spen and Grandad Philip,
and in the same operations as well.
So the Merville Battery crossing the Rhine.
Yep.
So this Ronald character has written a book called The Teenager's War, or his stories told. We'll try and get hold of that for sure. And he was saved with a lucky escape when a bullet passed between his webbing on his uniform and hit the crucifix in his pocket. And that was fine. But then we've done a little bit extra research. And what have we just found?
That he was actually at the annual 9th Para Battalion reunion dinner in 2016 with my granddad.
Yeah, there's a photograph we've just found with Grandad Phil,
which you can see if you're watching on YouTube.
Yeah, and there's lots here. So we'll put these pictures in as well. Yeah, wow, Ron took a picture after receiving his Legion d'Honneur. So we're just sort of saying to ourselves, aren't we, Ethan, that poor man who wrote about his son, Spen, doesn't really know what has happened to him.
So he's probably long dead now, but how he could have died, may he still be wondering
what happened?
What actually happened to him.
There's just an incredible picture there. Just I got all emotional there. It's not even my granddad. Just to see that photograph of Ronald Tucker and Phil, Grandad Philip Ward.
The stories that they both lost the same person together.
Yeah, and they definitely will have been in that place together, wouldn't they?
The impact it had on him.
Wow. Well, that was more emotional than I was thinking, just having a bit of research. And that's just while we're in between waiting here, aren't we? So the memory lives on, the stories live on, don't they, forever and ever and ever. I think we should definitely try and maybe come back to this once we've done a few more bits of research.
I remember going to the 9th Para Battalion reunion dinner in 2022 with my granddad, the last one before he died. And there he actually got to present Connor Taylor with his parachute regiment wings.
Wow. No, that is an honour, isn't it?
Yep.
Of Connor.
And then they also received a letter from one of the last ever ones to go out of Queen Elizabeth's office
Really,
before she died.
which is fitting, isn't it, for such a an amazing longevity of a monarch to be able to be one of the last people to write to Grandad Philip and his crew.
And the leader of the 9th Parachute Battalion felt like very touched by that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Ethan, Grandad Philip and everybody else would be very, very proud of the young man that you're becoming. And this needs to continue this, don't we? So tonight has been the most fascinating. I literally just sat here getting goosebumps and shivers and got a little bit emotional seeing that photograph.
Yeah.
So goodness knows how you felt doing this. And I promise you will definitely come back to it.
Also, it's amazing to find out just that little bit of research in the meantime, how much you can really find out. How much I'm going to take home and share with my family tonight.
Yeah, I kind of wish they were here, all of us watching this together, because I think just that moment there, finding that photograph of Ronald and Grandad Philip.
Yeah.
I wonder if they ever spoke in their later years about
Would
that.
they have ever talked about that?
Just to each other.
Or was it something they'd want to forget?
Because a lot of people, they don't talk about what happened because they want to just move on. But the fact that they were together there, and they must have had these regular meetings at least every year at the reunions.
And I think they did try and get together. Like my granddad, certainly, he was very sociable. He'd always go down to the church on a Saturday, volunteer, help out at the churchyard. And then he'd always have dinner with his friends at the pub in West Winch. Yeah.
Well, let's get this book from Amazon as well. And then we'll see maybe even a story in there about Grandad Phil.
That would be amazing,
Philip.
yeah.
All right. So listen, thank you so much for tonight.
No problem.
I feel like this is just scratching the surface here, isn't it? And hopefully you guys have enjoyed listening to this one and seeing some of the photographs that we've got. We'll do a little slideshow as well at the end of the video, just in case we missed any or we need to get some really interesting photos. Touched, Ethan, that you've shared this with us, and we will look forward to the next episode or the next in the.
I feel very pleasured to have to share the stories with you.
Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure, and I suppose we're keeping their stories alive, aren't we? All right.
Passing the memories down.
Definitely. Let's see what we'll get. We'll get little William to listen to this when he's older.
Yeah.
And see. So you'll be off when he starts listening to this. You'll be in university, probably, won't you? All rocking the world. Some engineering discovery to change the world. All right. Thank you very much, and we'll see you all very, very soon. Goodbye.